Hi everyone, this is Steve Junion. Welcome back to the Design Edge. My fail counter today is probably at about 20. You know, when you deal with personal things, sometimes the counter just goes really, really high. Actually, no, it's not too bad. It's probably at a couple 3, but I always have a goal every day to really kind of stretch myself, and that's part of it. And today we're coming back to you and talking a little bit about the business and what's going on as we start to prepare for inviting some guests in. So we're really testing, learning, iterating. We're trying out a new tool today, so that's good. All good things in the world. All right, we're going to go ahead and start by talking about the CCI, or Consumer-Centered Innovation Framework. What it is, it's a way to really look at how do we innovate, making sure that the consumer is at the center of everything we do. It's really a combination. It was a collaboration between myself and another expert in the field, Sean Nason. I had drawn out some original diagrams to try to put into a picture things that we were seeing and feeling and actually doing to make sense of it. And what it turned out to be, and you'll see in the show notes, is that we put the consumer in the middle, obviously. And that consumer can be internal or it could be external. Around the consumer, we have our values: know me, surprise me, make it easy. And building out the framework is leadership, mindset, and culture. And that's really a critical piece. Those pieces all work together. And surrounding all of that are the frameworks that most of you or some of you might be using today, whether it's some frameworks around lean, startup, whether it's around human-centered design, whether it's around service design. The CCI framework is pretty flexible. And this actually came about from Sean's visit to Xerox a number of years ago. He actually went to Xerox, and what he found there was actually pretty impressive. They had combined and taken parts and pieces of various frameworks and methodologies that made sense to them. And that's what we recommend. That's what I recommend is there's all these tools. Everyone will tell you theirs is the best and the greatest. It's kind of like the story I like to tell people. You know, I love the trades. I was a mechanic growing up in the military. And one of the things that I've noticed when tradespeople come to your house, let me give you an example. I had a plumber come to my house. He did some work. Later on, had to have another plumber come to my house. And he's like, hey, that plumber did that work. It's all jacked up and everything. So the second plumber or the second tradesman always complained, maybe not complained, but always critiqued in a negative sense what was going on with the first plumber's work. So this CCI framework, we published a couple of articles on it. It gives an overview of what it is, a little more in depth, and also a case study of how we've used that in the past and how I continue to use it. Part of the challenges with that framework is it really didn't tell organizations how to focus or where to focus first. And when you think about innovation, a lot of people think about a lot of brainstorming and so forth, but it's a lot of process behind it. And so I developed this thing called the IPA, the Innovation Prioritization Assessment. So one of the things that I have learned in all of this great work that I've been doing with some amazing people throughout my career is there was no real way to prioritize innovation. A question was often asked to me by my clients, where do I start? And so I created this assessment called the Innovation Prioritization Assessment. It still needs to be validated and all that sort of good stuff. However, I think it's a great way to start. And you basically got an X and Y axis, one of them being workforce investment and the other one being service demand. And then you also have one cutting up at a 45-degree angle talking about the consumer demand activities. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to balance, much like a how might we statement, what is needed from the perspective of the level of investment to deliver value to the consumer based on the service demand. And then you contrast that with what's really important from the consumer's perspective. You know, a lot of times what we do is we focus on this workforce investment and service demand from the organization's perspective, but we rarely involve, with some exceptions, the consumer and really what are their high demand types of activities. And what we do is we go and work with folks internally to really do an assessment. And right now at this point, it's really rudimentary, but it's really meant to help people think through where are the greatest opportunities for consumer-centered innovation. One of the things I want to talk about is food insecurity. What I have Had the pleasure of working around the country when I was at Humana in 7 different bold goal markets. I also, with another regional Medicaid plan, was able to work in their expansion markets. And one of the things that we heard of consistently, and this is around the social determinants of health, is around food insecurity. And actually, it affects many more people. Food insecurity versus hunger and starvation. We have to look up that term. I can't remember what the term of it is. Food insecurity, what it really means is, do I know where I'm going to get my next meal? It affects more people than we absolutely know, and we'll put some facts and data into the show notes. And how it affects them is it really puts a lot of stress. And of course, you can imagine food insecurity is going to impact folks that are from lower socioeconomic levels, and it's going to wreak havoc on their lives. If I'm a person who has diabetes and maybe a single mom with diabetes and I have children, I'm going to be focused on getting food for my kids and not necessarily focused on getting insulin. And it's so important. There are so many great organizations out there, food banks, government agencies, CDC, and so forth, that are really trying to tackle this problem. I mean, you can see it over the past decade or 2 decades with sometimes you'll have Blessings in Backpacks, which is a program that Christian organizations and other organizations will fill backpacks for kids to take home over the weekend. So they're for sure able to get meals over the weekend. And so there have been a lot of great advances in terms of addressing food insecurity, but we're a long way from really stamping that out. And there's some great work to be done there to really help people. Let me talk a little bit about the design of a sprint. As I mentioned, a former business partner and a good friend of mine, Sean Nason, and I developed a 12-week sprint process. Actually, it really runs about 14 to 16 weeks, depending on how fast the organization can move. And some people are saying, wow, you guys are supposed to move really fast. Why 12 to 14 weeks? Well, on my LinkedIn profile, it talks about me facilitating change at the speed of business. Sometimes business can't pull people for a week or 2 weeks solid. And so what we've done is we've tried to identify and modify our processes so that way they can go ahead and get the full experience. Plus, the extra time really allows them to dive down deep. All right, so let's give a quick overview of what a 12 to 14 week sprint looks like. First of all, you're going to have a kickoff and you're going to train people on the basics of human-centered design and the tools that you're going to use during the sprint, which hopefully you've worked with your key executives before then. And also, most importantly, what you're doing in that first kickoff meeting is really establishing your path forward using a how might we statement. And then from there, we go into some significant discovery. A lot of times working in healthcare organizations, they have a ton of data. The challenge is finding out who knows where the data is, getting access to it, and then really diving down deep into it. Let me give you an example. Most recently, we've been working on a project, and the case notes were found to be the most important out of everything that we looked at. Reviewing those case notes and interviewing members that are part of the population that we're trying to solve a challenge with was really critical. Some of those case notes, however, were over 300 pages long. Again, healthcare, somebody that's been in the healthcare system for many, many years, you're going to find that pretty frequently. But that's going to be part of that discovery stage. And after we finish the discovery stage, looking at both the quantitative and the qualitative data, we're going to spend some time just beginning to define the problem. While we don't really want to start with a problem, as we start to look at data, as we start to gather insights from our interviews with our consumers, and consumers, again, remember, it can be the actual customer, future customers, or it can be internal associates. Then we go out and we start really preparing people for deep dives again and starting to think about ideas around how to address this how might we statement. And again, further research. Finally, we get to one of the key cornerstones of the entire effort, which is a 3-day design sprint. And for most of you who have not read the book, there's a book by Google venture capitalists called Sprint. That's what the title is, Sprint. I'll put that in the show notes as well. But what it does is it lays out a nice 5-day format. We don't necessarily follow that format completely, but the mindset or the philosophy that's in it is something that we have done prior to ever actually taking a look at the book. The 3-day design sprint really involves taking all the insights that we've gathered, sparking ideas around how to solve. This is the first time in the 5th meeting that we get together with our clients where we actually allow them to start solving the problem. Up until that time, it's all around discovery, gathering insights, defining the problems and so forth. And there we actually get into building solutions. And towards the end, we actually build prototypes, and we also then get consumers to come in and provide insight and feedback on those prototypes. So it's a crazy 3 days. It's pretty amazing. I have the opportunity coming up to run another one of those 3-day sprints, and I'm incredibly excited about it. Once those prototypes are built and they've been tested, I'd say it's more around being street tested, but with actual consumers who might buy the new product or service or the revised product or service, we spend some more time building the prototypes out. In that 3-day design sprint, it's a very low fidelity prototype, and there's more detail obviously that has to be put into that to make sure that the details are fleshed out. Because then we go into a test and business process finalization. Following the further fleshing out of the prototypes, we then take the organization through additional testing and also building out the business plan. A lot of the business plan is developed through Business Model Canvas. If you haven't used that tool, you've been sleeping under a rock. All right, so let's talk about building out your business plan. As we begin the sprints, one of the things that I do is I create a very small team to create business model canvases. And if you aren't familiar with it, check out Alex Osterwalder, at Alex Osterwalder on Twitter, was the mastermind behind this, as he did a meta-analysis of a lot of business plans and boiled down the building of a business model to a single page. I had the pleasure of, 4 or 5 years ago, heading out to San Francisco and actually being taught by Alex. If you haven't looked at Business Model Canvas, you need to get out there and take a look at it. Because what the Business Model Canvas does on a single page is it allows common people like myself who aren't finance majors, who haven't been a CFO, to really understand the business. And the reason why I have a small team at the very beginning start taking a look at the Business Model Canvas and looking at departments that will be affected and filling it out is because you better understand how the business works. So as part of continuing to test your prototypes and creating the business plan, as I said, the Business Model Canvas is the first thing. And of course, when you're going to present to your C-suite, they're going to want to have a return on investment or a return on innovation. There are some great books on there about return on innovation. I'm not going to go into depth on that. We try to keep it simple and take a look at what's going on in and out of the industry and try to come up with a 80% confident level around the business plan and implementing the prototypes should the organization move forward. And then finally, they present to the C-suite. A lot of times the CEO will be involved. They almost have to be involved. A lot of times they're the sponsor because these 12 to 14 week events are expensive. There's a huge investment from a financial standpoint. There's a huge investment from a people standpoint. And there's also just a huge investment for those that are participating and investing the time and energy, not only during the times that we meet, but between times where they're actually doing additional research and so forth. But that final presentation is really a culmination of not only building the prototypes and sharing with them the consumer insights, but it's also sharing things like personas, journey maps, those types of things, and of course the business model canvas. The thing I like really the most about the business model canvas, besides the fact that it's on a single page, is that you can quickly look at a single page and really understand how the business works, whether it be the customer segments and the value prop for each of those customer segments, or the key resources and activities and key partnerships that are required to enable this business model to work. It's a great opportunity to look at business from a unique perspective because we all know that as soon as the strategy is presented, it's outdated, right? So the business model canvas being on a single page allows us to update quickly and move fast. So a lot of times I'll be asked questions about how do I interview someone? How do you ask questions? That's a great question in and of itself. I think a lot of it depends. A lot of times what we do in some of our immersion training, just to get people familiar with talking with people outside of the office, is we actually have them do some feet on the street interviews. And that's really important as part of the immersion experience. You'd be amazed at how many people have had 18 conversations by the time they come into one of our immersion training sessions, but they're afraid to go out and actually talk to people on the street or talk to their consumers or their customers. And what we really try to do is help them break down those barriers. And the types of interview questions we ask a lot of times are very open-ended, semi-structured types of interviews. As part of my PhD program, I did some phenomenological interviews, which are a little bit more in-depth and a lot more intensive. And we don't want them to be intensive. What we want them to do is build questions around the topic, the how might we that we've established, and go out and test those questions. Because 9 times out of 10, those questions aren't great the first or second time they ask them, but we advise them how to adapt and adjust in the field. And of course, when anybody goes out to interview someone, it's not just one person. We like to have someone who's doing the interview, we like to have an observer, and we like to have a scribe or a note taker. And also, too, we like to mix and match the groups. Imagine if you're a woman and you have 3 men coming up to interview you. It's probably not a great idea. You might want to have at least one woman, and hopefully leading the interview, talk to the woman that you're going to be interviewing. You're going to be sensitive about this, especially when you're doing feet on the street, maybe not with your consumers, and randomly asking people questions. Make sure you can relate to them, and more importantly, make sure that they can relate to you. In terms of summarizing the interview, a lot of times it's like a big word cloud that we're looking for. There's some amazing research that's been done in terms of how to really analyze qualitative data. We're not going that far. We're not writing a PhD. We're not writing a dissertation. But we do ask people to take copious notes and then to highlight major themes that they've seen, underline major problems that they've identified, and pull all of that together. So if I have a class of 20 people, or let's say 18, and I have 6 teams of 3, and I send them out to talk to maybe 5 consumers out about a particular topic, I now have 30 data points. 30 interviews that might last 2 to 5 minutes. That's all. We're not saying it's a half-hour interview. We do those as well. But these brief interviews, I can get 30 data points or 30 sets of interviews there I can pull insights and data points from. And what's interesting is that we can take all of those, share what we've learned, identify the themes, look at the challenges and the problems that the consumers are having as just another input as we go to build prototypes and those kind of things. A lot of people, when we talk about a 12 to 14 week sprint, they say, so what am I going to get out of this? And typically what I say is you're going to get out of it what you put into it. And I know that sounds cheap and it sounds a little bit facetious, and it is. But people, when they participate in a sprint, can really deliver amazing prototypes that have been tested with the consumer, at least a low fidelity prototype. And there's a number of ways to go about prototyping, but we're talking about low fidelity prototypes here. But what you can take away is you're really changing the culture. Earlier, I talked about this consumer-centered innovation framework, and in addition to the immersive training that we do, so part of these longer 12-week sprints is really helping to build the culture, as I said. When you have a group of 12 to 13 people that are actively engaged in defining an opportunity within the organization, as well as identifying and defining problem statements, and then building prototypes and testing those prototypes, what you get are 3 to 5 various prototypes that come out of maybe 100 or more potential solutions. And that's what we do. We build a number of solutions through a number of creative activities, and we then vote, and the sponsors, this comes from the Sprint book, sponsors have ultimate kind of approval or denial of what prototypes move forward. But what you've done is you've actually addressed in 12 weeks, you've addressed an actual business problem that's out there. And what the takeaway is not only have I addressed the problem, identified it, built a solution for it, I've also built a business case for it. And that allows organizations to move a lot more quickly and look at their work differently, most importantly from the perspective of their consumer. So I've had 2 chapters to my career. One was in aerospace. The second one has really been in healthcare. And a lot of times people will, when they know I come from aerospace, they'll say, wow, that seemed like quite a jump. Actually, both have high levels of complexity. They both have incredibly smart people that work for them, great leadership. The reason why I chose healthcare actually was because I had started a previous business up, and this is pre-ACA, and I wasn't able to get healthcare for my family. So in addition to being just really upset with the fact that I had to go into a chip product with the state for my kids being on that and not being able to cover one of us, I decided to join a healthcare company. I really wanted to understand what made it work, what made it tick, and how did they view their consumers? Because remember, at that time, if you had a pre-existing condition, even if it was short-term, you were either paying incredibly high premiums or you were just basically rejected. And that's what happened. I remember I was in Seattle with my family doing some work and taking some time off with my family. And when I heard that none of the three insurance companies that were in this area would accept us, it was very depressing and it was very sad, and it really drove me to want to learn more about the insurance industry. One of the hazards that many of the organizations I work with is that they have highly intelligent people. And that a lot of times can actually be a problem. I've been brought into corporate organizations because, let's say this, how do I say this easily? I'm kind of a pain in the ass. One organization that I've been working with recently said, and I quote, "You're able to kick us in the ass and we still love you," unquote. And what that means is we have these really bright, intelligent people, right, in groups that work together. And when you ask them to build a prototype or go on the street and do interviews with consumers, they never get up they never get up from their chair if you're in a classroom kind of environment. They really struggle with actually doing. They want to logic it out. And what we know from the perspective of human-centered design, service design, innovation, pick your flavor, right? You got to get up off your butt and you got to go do something. And really, that's where I think, again, a lot of cultures have walled themselves off in their offices from actually engaging with consumers, except for the people that I love the most, the people that interact with the customers every day, the consumers every day. And those are your frontline people. And oh, by the way, most of the time they're probably paid the least. It makes me insane. There's some great work out there in customer service that's bringing in consumer experience now and so forth. And I want to give a shout out to Shep Hyken, who's someone I follow and I think does a great job of that with his organization. It's really about going out and doing, because as much as the quantitative data will give you great insights, what I tell my clients is quantitative's great. It's going to tell you that you got a problem, but qualitative data tells you how to solve the problem. And I think that's really important. All right, so let me talk about someone that I admire, and I've never met her. Her name is Carrie Bodine, and she has a company, Carrie Bodine and Company. It's carriebodine.com. She is an expert in journey mapping. Somehow I got invited to a webinar regarding journey mapping. And if you know me for a minute, you know that as soon as I finish something, and as amazing as it might be, I celebrate for about 5 minutes and then I turn around and criticize myself for about 2 weeks. One of the things that I was doing, I was working with a client and they were struggling with the journey map. It was basically, I was helping their newly evolved or newly installed consumer experience department pick up and learn about these tools. And I heard Carrie speak on a podcast. I can't remember what it was for, but she talked about her work in terms of journey mapping. And it was brilliant. It was amazing. So the first thing I did is, of course, reached out on LinkedIn because, I was actually had one of those professional crushes on someone that when she talked about it, it made absolute sense. But also on her website, she has a really unique way of looking and creating journey maps. And so what I've done is, as I find thought leaders like Carrie or Shep Hyken, is I will point my clients to their work. Someone once told me that great artists copy, but the best artists steal. And I got to tell you, you don't really have to create much new in this industry. You might have to tailor it for a client. But people, thought leaders, and by the way, if you call yourself a thought leader, that's an instant knockout in my perspective. But if you go to carriebodine.com, she's got amazing resources on her website. They're there to download, they're there to use, and I love it. Shep Hyken is very similar. He publishes, the guy's insane. He publishes stuff every week. His focus has been on customer service and bringing the consumer experience into that. They both have great insights and tools that you can use in your organization. And you know what? Download them, try it, fail, get up, download it, try it, fail, get up, and just continue to search, continue to learn. That's the biggest piece of advice that I've given to this organization that has set up their own consumer experience department, is that it's okay to fail. I've actually showed them and demonstrated how to fail. More importantly, I've showed them how to continue to build their expertise and their knowledge. Another organization that we all, I think, have an affinity for is IDEO. And IDEO, through a number of different platforms, they have their own YouTube channel. I'm behind about 50 YouTube videos, but if you want to learn about human-centered design and some of the creative tools and so forth, go to their YouTube channel. There's also amazing classes at Udacity and Udemy and edX around consumer experience and innovation. Many of those are at no cost. I know that I have completed one time, I think it's the Udacity course that is designed by IDEO that focuses on social challenges we have, and they've been focusing on poverty and hunger and so forth. So IDEO has this amazing course online where you team up with people either locally or around the world, and you try to solve social justice issues. In this case, food insecurity. You've got to just pick your head up and look around because you'll be overwhelmed by the amount of resources that are out there. Let me talk a little bit about failure. I talk about it all the time. You hear it a lot. There's a number of kind of kitschy little sayings: fail fast, fail forward. Really what I try to tell people is if you fail, you've learned. And there are a number of, I don't have the studies, but there are a number of anecdotes out there that talk about how many times entrepreneurs fail before they actually succeed, and it's quite a large number. I don't have it off the top of my head. In any case, I really look at failure as learning. And if you have the right mindset, what you say to yourself every day is that you're going to fail. You're going to push against what the culture is today to help drive it to a future state. And anytime that you or an organization is taking a culture that's satisfied with what it's doing at this point in time and try to move it, it's going to react. And it's going to push, and it's going to pull, and it's going to try to knock you down. When you go out and you do interviews with consumers or customers, you're going to think that you have the most amazing questions. Or if you go out to test a prototype and you, forgot to include the consumer in it, you're going to take a beating, no matter how good it is. And the whole point is to get out there as much and as quickly as possible, to iterate all the time. So what that means is you're not going to sit around for 6 months thinking about the most amazing questions you can ask your consumer. You're going to spend about an hour building some questions and going out and street testing it. You're going to make revisions during that hour, and you're going to come back and you're going to share what you learned with the rest of the team. And then you're going to go out and you're going to test and revise again. And that's really the whole point behind some of the human-centered design and innovation work that we do. It's really about teaching organizations and individuals not to be afraid to fail, but to be okay with learning and not being perfect. And that's really tough. I'd almost like to start a leadership podcast to run how many leaders are jacked up because of their expectations, but I don't have time for that. I do want, if you're a leader, to know that in order for this to work for your organization, if you don't have the right mindset, and we're not talking about doing iterative innovations within a surgical suite. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about gathering insights and building prototypes of new products or services. And there are organizations that will actually go into the operating room. If you want to check out a really amazing organization, another one that I admire, check out MadPow. They're a fantastic group, work in healthcare as well, and other aspects of the industry. So a lot of people might say, well, hey, if I fail too many times, then why should I want to get back up? That's a really great question. The fact is that you're not really failing, as I said before, you're learning. And so every time you learn, the fall softens a little bit, right? And as you continue to build your expertise, you go from an hour of brainstorming on a set of questions to 15 minutes. And it's always informed by the work that you've done before then. What we've been able to do is we've been able to teach people as part of our immersion training, which is about 6 to 7 hours, how to build a really good set of first questions on a topic that relates to their company. And they go out and ask those questions. They know as we send them out that there's going to be a really great chance that they're going to have to shift after the first or second interview. And we encourage them to do that. And so typically we'll ask them within about 20 to 30 minutes to interview 6 or 8 people, anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes long. So about a half hour to really just get the sense and get the fear out of them, allow them to fail, allow them to learn, and allow them to iterate to a much better place in terms of the questions than when they started. So then how do you turn failure into success? And ultimately, an organization looks at an individual or department and they ask, how have you positively impacted the business? I mean, if you think about it, the business is paying our salaries, they're paying our benefits, they're helping us do the things that we want to do from a financial and even a professional and more emotional perspective. What the organization wants is they want to see business impact. And what does that mean? Well, most organizations have a vision, mission, and values. They also have specific KPIs or key performance indicators or metrics. And most importantly, they want to make sure that they bring in new people to buy their product or service or keep the ones that already exist. If you go through this process, you're going to be building prototypes, then that can potentially help the organization continue to build better, bigger business impact. So one of the things I want to talk about is who makes a good client for human-centered healthcare. I think it's really important to understand that we don't want to work with everyone. And it sounds a little braggadocious, and maybe it is, but we want to work with organizations where the CEO is fully behind understanding the consumer at a much deeper level. If your CEO isn't involved, or at least someone from the C-suite isn't involved, don't reach out to me, please. It's not gonna work. What you can do is you can actually reach out to me. Maybe I lied about that, but you can reach out to me, and I'll try to advise you in terms of how to get started and what to think about. Because no matter what you do, if I try to affect change at the department level, what ends up happening is that culture is going to eventually look at you and go, hey, you're trying to do something different. Even though it's special and it could be unique and it could really make amazing impact to the organization, many times, not all the time, but many times what the culture will do is it'll try to put you back in your place. So one of the things that you really have to do is make sure that your C-suite is involved, on board, and engaged, and that they really want to learn about their consumers and customers at a deeper level. So again, if that's something you're looking for, again, as I said, I've spent a great deal of time about the last decade in healthcare, but these processes, tools, and methodologies, they work for any industry, and that's what I love about it. Anytime you have a framework or a system, you have inputs, you have a process, and you have outputs. And in our case, what we're trying to do is deliver value to organizations and businesses by helping them not only better understand their consumer, but building solutions that will help the business move forward. So a lot of people ask me, what do I focus on in terms of development? Here's a quick tip. If you have not downloaded from your local library their app, or from if you went to your undergrad or your graduate school, almost all of them have an app where you can listen to audiobooks or read ebooks. Now, I probably listen to almost a book a week, if not more than that. So one of the most recent books that I've listened to in terms of my development, or I've actually started, is called The Art of Insight. And that is by Charles Kiefer. I actually just started it recently. But what's really interesting is it talks about how insights are a metaphorical light bulb over your head that really results in an aha moment. And we talk about really getting people to a point to have those insights and those aha moments through our immersion training as well as our 12-week sprints. I also spend a lot of time focusing on other aspects of learning. I have an Audible account. I have had to pause it now for 3 months because there's so many great audiobooks and ebooks in the public library as well as my grad school. But Service Startup is a great book that I started listening to. Sprint, the book I told you about earlier. And there's a whole number. I mean, if I go to my library on Audible right now, Thinker Toys is one that I haven't started yet. High Performance Habits by Brendan Burchard. He's a thought leader in terms of self-development. I listen to stuff by David Rock, Your Brain at Work. I also like to look at those who are disruptors. And so Richard Thaler wrote a book called Misbehaving, The Making of Behavioral Economics, which I've listened to parts and pieces of that. But anyways, 9 times out of 10, if I have a headset in my ear. Oh, my favorite book of all time. I got to give a shout out to, let's see, Nathan Furr and Jeff Dyer. They wrote a book called The Innovator's Method. If you are just starting out and you like to highlight and annotate, buy this book. I continue to listen to it, usually if I've had a bad day. Well, not a bad day, but maybe a challenging day. But it's called The Innovator's Method, bringing the lean startup into your organization. What I absolutely love about what Nathan Furr and Jeff Dyer do is they actually walk you through not only the mindset, but also some of the tools and how you can leverage them. It's probably one of the most complete books that I've read around innovation, because it's actual shit you can use. So if you guys ever listen to this, awesome book. I love it. It's something I recommend to every consumer experience or innovation shop that I get a chance to speak with or work with. So a lot of times people ask me, Steve, what tools do you use? Honestly, if I have a sketch pad and a pen or pencil, those are really the two primary tools I use on a day-to-day basis. I got to admit, I wish I could draw as well as Alex from Business Model Generation does, because the way he sketches is absolutely amazing. But the reason I love to draw is because so many times people understand, what is it? What is it they say? A picture's worth 1,000 words. A diagram, a framework, a model is worth 10,000 words in a corporate organization. And so what I've learned to do is to really take what people say and try to create some sort of visual out of it. Now, granted, I use stick people, but in every single event I run, I force people to use that side of their brain that they haven't used probably since kindergarten. And oh, by the way, I am not an artist. I think I mentioned that before. As I said, I'm not necessarily an artist, but there are 2 times that I felt like I was at the peak of my artistic, career. I drew a cow in kindergarten that I still remember to this day actually looked like a cow. It was amazing. And then I did this negative imprint of a raccoon climbing a tree. I want to say it won an award. Maybe I'm just kind of fooling myself. That was in middle school. But those are the only 2 things that I've done that were technically artistic in nature. But I tell you what, you give me a sketch pad and a pencil or a pen or whatever and some markers or Post-it notes and a Sharpie. Man, that's all I need to run a workshop. You give me Post-it notes, give people Sharpies. We can have a great time. We can have a great time for an hour. We can have a great time for a day. Or we can run you through, through a 5-day sprint or a 12 to 14-week sprint, depending on what's going on. But honestly, the great thing about what I have the honor to be able to do is it doesn't necessarily require, a platform where people can code. I work all the way up until you get to that point. And that's kind of where I stop. So yeah, I was one of those people who decided to go get a PhD. Shout out to Glenn Williams and an amazing role model and leader that has passed since I worked for him, Cliff Purrington. But they encouraged me to go get my doctorate. Both Cliff and Glenn were people I respected and admired, and I still do to this day. Cliff gave me a shot at doing some amazing work around the world. And Glenn is a stand-up dude. He can solve any problem that you have, and he's an expert in the learning, leadership, and executive development space. So both amazing people. And through my journey, I had the chance to do some adjunct work for my alma mater. And I really enjoyed it. And the thing I think the most is that, I don't look at content as static. And my degrees and this type of work that I do now allow me to engage and prototype and run experience as part of my classes. Now, I don't do that a lot anymore. I ran a couple of sessions for master's classes over a couple of years. But what it taught me was that, just a second. What it taught me was that even as a professor, you need to keep innovating. You need to keep not only on top of your game, but you also have to keep innovating from the perspective of, in this case, the consumer being the learner. And I have to say that my 25 plus years in the learning, leadership, and development world, putting the learner at the center of everything that I did from that perspective, and this whole work around consumer-centered innovation and human-centered design, where you put the consumer at the center of everything that you do, they're kind of like cousins. So, the jump from moving from leadership executive development to consumer-centered innovation and using the human-centered design tools is not a big leap. Philosophy, mindset are very similar. So the tools are unique. And actually what I've done is I've started to transform how I even design learning experiences by bringing in this combination of human-centered design and instructional design. And that's something I'm really excited about. I'm even more excited that some organizations are starting to put out job descriptions that they're looking for human-centered instructional designers. And I got to tell you, that's the dream. So I've asked myself a lot what I want to do with this podcast. And to be honest with you, I really don't know. It's something that I'll figure out as we go along. I think if I spent time really thinking about what I want to do with the podcast, I would have exactly 0 podcasts completed. And so the goal is, much like we do in our work, we want to iterate frequently. We want to iterate quickly. And a lot of that is on me. The goal is to put out at least 1 podcast a week over the first 3 to 6 months. So let's just say 6 months if I can commit to that. And see how it goes. Get input, feedback from people. There's already been a number of podcasts that have been done regarding human-centered design, but none specifically towards healthcare. And we'll start in healthcare, but we'll branch out as well. As we learn from you and from others, the podcast will evolve as well.
Dirty our eyes and dirty our clothes, dirty our minds with your luscious face.